Welcome back to Inside the Philippines. I'm glad you're here. Now, most of the stories we tell on this channel, and you'll know this if you've been watching for a while, involve things like wire transfers to women the man's never met, bar girls in Angeles City, that kind of thing. This one's different. This one's about a man who did his homework, who made a spreadsheet, who told himself, quite sensibly, that he wasn't going to be one of those lads you see crying into a camera about losing his savings to someone he met on Filipino Cupid. His name is Brendan. He's 65 now, retired, originally from County Leitrim in the west of Ireland. Spent his working life underground in the mines and then maintaining the turbines at a peat station. Careful man, methodical man, the kind of man who reads the manual before he touches the equipment. He came to the Philippines at 61 with a plan, a budget, and what he thought was a clear head. This one's going to stay with you for a while. Here's his story, in his own words. Right. So, I should tell you up front that I'm not a man who's comfortable talking about himself. Never have been. You grow up in rural Leitrim in the 70s, you're not exactly encouraged to sit around discussing your inner life. My father worked. His father worked. You got on with it. So, if I seem like I'm rushing past certain parts, it's not because they didn't matter. It's just how I'm built. I left school at 16. This would have been 1975. Same week as my cousins Declan and Martin, we all went down the Arigna mine together. So it's closed now, closed in 1990. But at the time it was just what you did if you were from that part of the country and you weren't going to university, which none of us were. It was dark down there, obviously. Cold in a particular way, the kind that gets into your joints. But honest work. You knew exactly what you were doing and why. There's a comfort in that I don't think I fully appreciated until much later. When Arigna shut, I moved into maintenance at the Allen Power Station. Less dramatic than the mine, if I'm honest. More paperwork. But the pension scheme was solid, and I knew how to keep machinery running, so it suited me well enough. I retired at 58. 38 years of keeping things operational. I was reasonably good at it. I married Maryad in 1988. We'd known each other since we were children. She was from Drumshanbo, just up the road. 2 kids, Kiaran, who's in Toronto now doing something with computers that I don't fully understand, and Awaife, who's in Galway. Good kids, sensible. Got that from their mother. I won't go into the full detail of Maryad's illness. I don't think that's fair to her memory, and I don't think it's what you're here for. What I'll say is this. Early onset Alzheimer's, the diagnosis came when she was 52. Over the following 11 years, she declined in the way that condition declines, which is to say gradually, then all at once. And then you're standing in a kitchen at 7 in the morning, and someone is explaining to you that she passed quietly in the night, and you find yourself thinking, very practically, that you need to ring the doctor and the priest, and probably a wifey before she hears it from someone else. I managed her care the way I managed everything. Schedules, medication charts on the fridge, a whiteboard in the hall with the day's appointments. I knew every nurse on the district team by name. I became, over those 11 years, a very organized man with a very full diary and absolutely no idea what I was going to do when the diary was empty. When she passed, I was 60 years old. The house was paid, the pension was in. Kiaran was settled. Awaife rang every Sunday. The neighbors were very decent. There were casseroles. There was the rosary said. There was genuine kindness from people who'd known us for 30 years. And then, in the way of these things, everyone went back to their lives, which was only right and proper. Oh, but there I was. I went to Mass that first Sunday on my own, and I sat in the pew where we'd always sat, and I couldn't tell you a single word of what was said. I've been going to Mass my entire life, and I couldn't tell you if there was a homily or not. I came out into the car park and stood there in the October cold for a good 5 minutes before I remembered where I'd parked. I want to be precise about what that period felt like, because I think it matters for understanding the rest of what I'm going to tell you. It wasn't grief, exactly. Or it wasn't only grief. I'd been grieving Myriad in small pieces for 11 years by the time she died. What it was, more than anything, was a complete absence of structure. My entire adult life had been organized around external obligations, the mine, the station, the children when they were young, and then Myriad's care for more than a decade. I didn't know, at 60, how to exist without something to organize. I went to Mass out of habit, and found the habit hollow. I watched the match on a Saturday, and couldn't make myself care whether Mayo won or lost, which, if you know anything about Mayo men and their football, will tell you something about my state of mind. I started watching YouTube at 11 o'clock at night, because I couldn't sleep, and the television had nothing I wanted. That's how it started. I want to be clear about that, because some people imagine there was a more deliberate process. There wasn't. I was in the armchair at 11 o'clock with a mug of tea gone cold, and the algorithm served me a video of a lad from Waterford standing on a seafront I didn't recognize. Baseball cap, short sleeves in what was apparently January, talking about how his entire month, rent, food, the woman who came in to clean twice a week, everything, cost him under €900. I did the sum in my head. My heating oil bill the previous winter had been over €800, and that was before Christmas. I watched the video again. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched, and I counted them at the time because it struck me as relevant. 43 videos about retiring in the Philippines. I watched them the way I used to read equipment manuals, systematically, taking notes, cross-referencing the information. I built a spreadsheet. Rent in various cities, food costs, transport, health care, visa requirements. I was aware, I want to say this clearly, that these videos have an agenda. The men making them are often selling something, or they've built a life there and they want to feel good about it, or both. I factored that in, and I applied what I thought was a sensible discount to everything they claimed. I rang AWIF and told her I was looking at options. She went quiet, in the way a wifey goes quiet when she has an opinion she's deciding whether to share. She asked if I was all right. I said I was fine. I was just doing research. She said, okay, so. Her tone suggested it was not okay, so. But she didn't push, and I didn't invite her to. Ciaran, when I mentioned it, said it sounded like a plan. He meant well. I applied for a tourist visa, which gives you 30 days initially, with extensions available. I didn't pursue the retirement visa, the SRRV, straight away. I wanted to see the country first before committing anything significant. That frugal instinct, at least, served me reasonably well. I booked a return flight I was fairly sure I wasn't going to use. And in March of 2023, 4 months after my 61st birthday, I landed in Cebu. The heat hit me like opening an oven door. I stood outside the terminal with my one big case and my carry-on, and I thought, well, this is a different thing entirely. I took the bus to Dumaguete, rather than a connecting flight. Cheaper, and I wanted to see something of the country. 4 hours down through Cebu, and then a ferry crossing to Negros Oriental. By the time I arrived, it was early evening, and I was, to be honest, absolutely destroyed from the journey. But I found the apartment I'd arranged through a Facebook group, 12,000 pesos a month, which works out at roughly €200, for a clean 1-bedroom 2 streets from the boulevard, and I put my case down and opened the window, and there was warm air and the sound of something frying nearby, and somebody's karaoke leaking from a house somewhere down the street. And I stood there for a moment and thought, all right, this might work. I rang Aoife that evening from the waterfront. She asked if I'd eaten. I had rice and some kind of fish at a little place near the apartment, 40 pesos, about 60 cents. She laughed at that. I told her it was going to be fine. And I meant it. For about 6 weeks it was. The days had a shape to them, which was more than I could say for the previous 2 years in Leitrim. I was up at 5:30 every morning without an alarm. Old habit, that. And out walking the boulevard before the heat became serious. Dumaguete wakes up gradually. The tricycles start early. These little motorbike contraptions with a sidecar welded on, painted in whatever color the owner fancied, rattling past with passengers squeezed in at angles that would give a physiotherapist nightmares. Street vendors setting up. The smell of something sweet frying. I later learned it was bibinka, a rice cake thing. The woman on the corner made them every morning, and they were very good. Church bells at 7. The boulevard itself runs along the water, and in the early morning it's genuinely pleasant. Joggers, old men doing Tai Chi of all things, the occasional stray dog making its rounds with great professional seriousness. I ate breakfast at a carinderia. That's basically a small canteen, open front, plastic chairs, a woman serving from big pots behind a glass counter. Sinangag, which is garlic fried rice with a fried egg and something called tocino, which is sweet cured pork. The entire thing cost me about 70 pesos, not even €1.20. I thought about the breakfast roll I used to get at the Centra in Drumshanbo for €4.50, and something in me relaxed in a way it hadn't in a long time. I'll be straight with you. The first 6 weeks, the plan worked exactly as advertised. My total outgoings that first month, rent, food, a few San Miguels of an evening, a SIM card, 2 tricycle rides when it was too hot to walk, came to about 42,000 pesos, roughly €700. I had my Irish pension coming in, the state pension plus the small board namona occupational one, which together came to just under €1,400 a month. I was, for the first time in recent memory, actually accumulating money, rather than watching it drain away on heating oil and rates, and the general expensive misery of an Irish winter. So the logistics worked. See, I want to be fair to the YouTube lads on that point. The numbers they quoted were roughly accurate, at least to begin with. What they don't mention in those videos, or what they mention and you don't fully absorb until you're there, is the specific quality of the loneliness. It's a different texture to the loneliness you have at home. At home in Leitrim, I was lonely in a familiar environment surrounded by people who'd known me for 40 years. Here, I was lonely in a place that was genuinely interesting, which almost made it worse, because there was nobody to turn to and say, "Did you see that? The way the light hits the water at 6 in the morning? Did you see that?" That's what led me to the cafe, really. Not the coffee, which was fine, but nothing special. The company. It was a small place on a side street off the boulevard, the kind with ceiling fans and mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu. Primarily foreigners in the afternoons, which is what I'd been avoiding, if I'm honest. I hadn't come all this way to sit with a crowd of lads from Wolverhampton complaining about the traffic. But by week 4, I was there most days regardless, because the alternative was the apartment. Derek ran the afternoon table. That's the only way to describe it. He didn't own the cafe, but he presided over a particular corner of it from about 2 o'clock onwards, as though he'd been granted some kind of license. Retired English teacher from somewhere outside Derby, been in Dumaguete for 6 years. A decent man, opinionated about things that didn't require strong opinions, like the correct way to order fish at a particular restaurant. But genuinely kind and useful when it mattered. He knew the city the way you only know a place after years. Which Mercury drug branch had the most reliable stock? Which tricycle drivers were honest about the fare? Who to avoid at the immigration office? There were 4 or 5 regulars at that table. A Canadian named Phil, who was quiet in a watchful sort of way. A German fellow called Werner, who was very pleased with his own sense of humor. And Shion from Cork, who'd been there 8 years and had the look of a man who'd made peace with most things. I liked Shion immediately. You know how sometimes you meet a person and you recognize something, not a similarity exactly, more like a shared frequency. He was a former electrician, as it happened. Not a miner, but the same general category of man. Practical, not given to sentiment. He quite funny in a way he didn't always intend. It was at that table, one Thursday afternoon in late April, that Derek mentioned Glenda. He didn't make a production of it. He was talking about the clinic down the road. He'd been in there the week before about something with his knee. And he mentioned that there was a very capable nursing aide there, a local woman, who sometimes joined them for coffee after her shift. She'd be coming by later if she wasn't kept. He said it the way you'd mention the weather, informational. She arrived at about 4:30. She was 38, though I didn't know that yet. Compact, composed, wearing her clinic scrubs still with a cardigan over them. She said hello to Derek, nodded to the others, sat down, ordered a black coffee, and then turned to me with a quite direct look and said, "You're the Irishman Derek mentioned." I said I was. She asked where in Ireland. I said Leitrim. She said she knew a family from Leitrim. They'd been parishioners at her uncle's church years ago. The name escapes her now. I said there weren't many of us. She smiled at that. And that was, more or less, the whole of it. She stayed 40 minutes, drank her coffee, asked me a few questions about Ireland that seemed like genuine curiosity. The weather, whether it was true the pubs were open all day, what Gaelic football actually was, and then said she had to get home to help with dinner, and left. I watched her go and thought, well, she seems perfectly normal. That sounds like a low bar. It wasn't at the time. I want to explain something because I think it matters. I'd heard the warnings before I came. Every man who goes to the Philippines hears them. The bar girls, the online scammers, women with 5 foreign boyfriends, all sending money monthly. I wasn't naive about that ecosystem. What I hadn't accounted for was what it would do to my judgment in the other direction. I'd been so primed to look for a certain type of thing. The manufactured flattery, the urgent requests, the story that escalated too quickly, that when none of those things were present, I took their absence as a kind of clearance. She hadn't complimented me. She hadn't touched my arm. She hadn't told me I was different from other men. She'd asked about Gaelic football and finished her coffee and gone home for dinner. By the standards I'd set myself, this was practically a character reference. She came back the following Thursday, and the one after that. By the 3rd week, she and I had started arriving at the cafe at roughly the same time, independently, in the way that isn't entirely independent. We talked easily. She had opinions about things, not aggressive opinions, but real ones. She disliked a particular local politician with specific reasons. She thought Derek talked too much, which was accurate. She was interested in the maintenance work I'd done, asked questions about the power station that weren't polite questions. She actually wanted to know how the turbines worked. I found myself explaining things I hadn't talked about in years. She mentioned, during the 4th week, that she went to Mass every Sunday at the cathedral on the boulevard. I said I did too, more or less. She said she'd see me there, so I went. She was there with two of her younger sisters, both of them in their 20s, polite girls who called me sir in a way that made me feel approximately 110 years old. After Mass, we walked along the boulevard for a bit, the four of us, and bought buko juice from a cart. Young coconut juice, drunk through a straw directly from the coconut. And it was a pleasant enough morning, and I thought nothing much about it beyond that. I think about that morning quite a bit now, actually. Not because anything happened. Because nothing happened, and I took that for something it possibly wasn't. By the end of June, we had settled into something that I suppose you'd have to call a relationship, though neither of us used that word for quite a while. It had the texture of something real. That's what I keep coming back to. She wasn't performing warmth, or if she was extraordinarily good at it, which amounts to the same practical problem. We met at the cafe most Thursdays. Sunday Mass had become a standing arrangement. Occasionally, she'd finish her shift at the clinic and ring to ask if I'd eaten, and we'd get dinner somewhere nearby. A place on the corner near the public market did sinigang na baboy that she said was the best in Dumaguete, and I was in no position to argue. We'd sit there with the ceiling fan going and the noise of the street coming in through the open front, and talk about whatever came up. Her work, the family in Bayawan, my time at the power station. Nothing significant. Just the accumulation of ordinary evenings that turns into a life. I am aware of how that sounds. A 61-year-old man from Leitrim finding his feet over a bowl of pork soup in Negros Oriental. But there it is. Now, the motorbike. In late June, about 8 weeks in, she mentioned during coffee that her motorbike was giving trouble. The carburetor, she thought. She needed it for work. The clinic was a 20-minute ride from where she was staying, and the tricycles were unreliable at her shift times. She mentioned it the way you mention a nuisance. Not looking at me, just conversational. I asked how much the repair would be. She said she wasn't sure. Probably 8,000 or 9,000 pesos. I said I'd sort it. She looked at me then and said she wasn't asking. I said I knew that. And I gave her 9,000 pesos, which works out at about €150, and she thanked me quietly, and that was the end of it. And I want to be honest about my state of mind at that moment. I wasn't doing a calculation. I wasn't thinking, this is an investment, this is buying something. I was thinking, this is a person I like who has a practical problem, and I can solve it without noticing the money is gone. Which was true. €150 was nothing. It was 3 trips to the supermarket in Leitrim. About 10 days later, she mentioned that her youngest sister Rina was starting her 2nd year at the university in Dumaguete. Silliman University, just up the road from the boulevard. And that the enrollment fees were due and the family was short. 15,000 pesos. About €250. She wasn't asking that time either, technically. She was explaining a situation. I gave her the money. Then there was the balikbayan box. If you don't know what that is, it's a care package, a big cardboard box that Filipinos abroad send home to their families. It's a whole cultural institution. The boxes are enormous. Glenda was assembling one for her mother in Bayawan, and she asked if I'd like to contribute something. Tinned goods, biscuits, soap, that kind of thing. I spent an afternoon at the Robinson's supermarket on the edge of town filling a basket. Maybe 2,000 pesos, about €30. It felt like nothing. It also, I realize now, felt like something. Like participating. Like being part of a household rather than just a visitor to someone else's life. It was around this time that Glenda suggested I look at a different apartment. She raised it practically. The place I was in, the 12,000 peso one, was fine, she said, but the area wasn't great, and the building had no security to speak of. She knew of a place in a better part of the city, closer to where she worked. A proper one-bedroom with air conditioning in every room and a small balcony. The landlord was reliable. The area was quieter. She thought I'd be more comfortable. I went to look at it. It was noticeably nicer. Tiled floors, a proper kitchen. The balcony she'd mentioned with a view of a small garden. The landlord was a pleasant woman who spoke good English and seemed entirely legitimate. The rent was 22,000 pesos a month, about €360. Still well within my means. I was saving money every month, even at that rate, but almost double what I'd been paying. I moved in at the start of July. Now here's the thing I want you to sit with, because I've sat with it for long enough. And the apartment suggestion was not unreasonable. It genuinely was a better place. She wasn't getting anything from the move directly. She didn't live there, didn't share the rent. From a purely practical standpoint, her advice was sound. And I think that's one of the things that makes this particular story harder to tell cleanly. There was no single moment where something obviously wrong happened. Each thing, individually, made a kind of sense. After I moved, Glenda started coming over to cook occasionally. She made adobo the first time. Chicken in vinegar and soy, bay leaves, black pepper, and it was very good. She brought her own spices. She knew where I kept things within 2 visits. There is something about a person moving comfortably through your kitchen that bypasses certain defenses, I think. I don't know how else to put it. And I need to tell you something that I find uncomfortable to say. There were moments with Glenda, small moments, nothing dramatic, where I noticed something that reminded me of Maread. Not her face, nothing like that. A way she had of going quiet and efficient when something needed to be done. A directness that didn't have any performance in it. The way she handled the adobo pot with the same matter-of-fact competence that Maread had had about everything, from changing a fuse to managing a district nurse at 7 in the morning. I noticed it. I didn't examine it. That was a mistake. By the end of August, my Tuesdays had shape again. I had somewhere to be most afternoons, and someone who sometimes cooked dinner and mass on Sunday mornings, and Sian at the cafe, and the walk in the early morning before the heat came up. So I was spending roughly 50,000 pesos a month total, about €820, which was comfortably inside what I had coming in. I was still putting money away. I rang Awife one Sunday evening, and she asked if there was anyone. I said there was someone I'd met, a local woman, nothing serious. Awife went quiet in the way she does. She asked if I was being careful. I said yes. I was not, in any meaningful sense of the word, being careful. But I believed it when I said it. It was Glenda who suggested, in late August, that I meet the family. She said it simply. Her mother was always asking about me, and it would mean a lot to them if I visited Bayawan. She said I didn't have to. She said she wasn't pushing. I said I'd go. Glenda briefed me on the bus down. Not formally. It came out in conversation, or the way she did most things. Practical, no drama. She mentioned that her mother would be upset if I arrived empty-handed. Pasalubong, she said. It's the custom. When you come from somewhere, you bring something. It doesn't have to be much. Biscuits, maybe. Sweets for the younger ones. Something to show you were thinking of them. I'd stopped at the Gaisano Mall the previous afternoon and filled a bag. A tin of biscuits, the kind in the blue metal box. A bottle of Tanduay dark rum for the father. A bag of boiled sweets. Some tinned sardines because Glenda had mentioned offhand that her mother liked them. The whole lot came to maybe 1,200 pesos, about €20. I felt slightly self-conscious carrying it, like a schoolboy showing up to a birthday party. The bus from Dumaguete to Bayawan took about an hour and a half. The road went through sugarcane fields and small towns with basketball courts out front and sari-sari stores selling sachets of shampoo and individual cigarettes. I watched it go past and thought about what I was doing. Nothing alarming. Just a man meeting his girlfriend's family. Perfectly ordinary thing. I want to be clear about something before I describe what happened in Bayawan. The welcome I received there was genuine. I'm as certain of that now as I was then. These were not people performing warmth for a foreign audience. They were a family who had been told about this Irishman for several months, and were pleased to finally see him standing in their yard. The house was a modest concrete structure at the end of a short lane off the main barangay road, painted yellow, maybe 20 years old, through a covered veranda at the front with plastic chairs. There was a dog. There was a rooster somewhere out the back that was audible throughout the entire visit. The mother, Glenda called her Nane, came out before we'd even reached the gate, wiping her hands on her apron. And the way her face arranged itself when she saw me was the face of a woman receiving something she'd been hoping for a long time. The father, Mang Benny, shook my hand with both of his, formal, serious. He was a compact man with a face like weathered wood, and he looked at me for a moment in a way I recognized. The look of a man who is sizing up someone who matters to his family. I met his eyes and held them. He nodded, once, and that seemed to settle something. There were, by my count, 11 people in that house by lunchtime. 4 younger siblings I hadn't met, the various partners and children, a cousin who seemed to live there, an elderly woman who was introduced as an aunt. Glenda moved through all of them effortlessly, arranging, explaining, translating when needed, keeping the thing running. I sat on the veranda with Mang Benny and tried to make conversation. His English was limited, but functional. He asked about Ireland. I told him about Leitrim. He asked if we had rice. I said no, mostly potatoes. He nodded, as though this confirmed a long-held suspicion about the Irish. The mother cried at one point, briefly, while we were eating. Not dramatically. Just a few tears that she wiped away quickly. Glenda touched her arm and said something in Cebuano, and the mother laughed. I didn't ask what was said. Some things you don't need translated. The lunch was enormous. Silachon manok, whole roasted chicken, and pork adobo, and a fish soup I couldn't identify, and rice, of course, and ensaymada sweet bread and fruit. It was clearly a significant effort. I thought about that. They didn't have money. This meal had cost something. I gave them the pasalubong bag after lunch. The mother went through it with great attention, examining each item. The biscuit tin clearly pleased her. The sardines made her laugh for some reason, and she said something to Glenda. Glenda translated. She said it was exactly what she would have bought herself. I don't know what to do with that memory now. I don't know whether to keep it or let it go. It felt real. Maybe it was real. I think that's the honest answer. On the bus back, Glenda was quiet for a while. Then she said, "They liked you." I said, "I like them." She looked out the window at the sugar cane and said, "My father doesn't show approval easily." I said I'd noticed. She didn't say anything else about it. Within 2 weeks of that visit, the calls and messages started arriving at a different pace. Nothing aggressive. I want to be precise about this. Nobody rang me up and demanded money. That's not how it worked. What happened was more like a change in air pressure, a gradual increase in the number of things that needed solving, and a gradual decrease in the distance between Glenda's family's problems and Glenda's conversations with me. Raffi was the first. He was the second youngest, 24, a compact, cheerful young man I'd met briefly at the house. He had a plan, Glenda explained, to operate a tricycle franchise. He'd identified a route, had interest from a cooperative, but needed capital for the vehicle and a small deposit. 35,000 pesos, about €570. She said she felt bad asking. She said Raffi was the entrepreneurial type in the family. I gave her the 35,000. 2 weeks after that, Maricel, the oldest of the younger sisters, the pregnant one I'd met at the house, due in about 6 weeks, was having complications. The private hospital in Bayawan wanted a deposit before they'd confirm a bed. 28,000 pesos, roughly €460. The public hospital was an option, but Glenda was worried about the facilities. I didn't ask many questions. And the roof, of course. The roof had been mentioned at lunch as a passing comment. There was a leak in the back bedroom that got bad during heavy rain. Now it was coming up more regularly. Typhoon season was approaching. The estimate to fix it was around 40,000 pesos. I didn't pay for the roof. Not yet. I said I'd think about it. But by this point, if I'm honest, the posture I'd adopted was one of general willingness. I was the man who sorted things. It was a posture I'd held for 11 years of Mariad's illness, and it sat on me comfortably, the way an old coat sits on you. I didn't notice I was wearing it. I sat down one Sunday morning with my receipts. I kept receipts, always, maintenance worker's habit, and added the column for the first time since arriving in Bayawan. The motorbike, Rena's university fees, the Balikbayan box contributions, the upgraded rent over 3 months compared to what I'd been paying, Raffi's tricycle deposit, Maricel's hospital, smaller things I'd almost forgotten, a bag of groceries here, a medical consultation there. The total was somewhere around 180,000 pesos, about €3,000. I sat with that number for a while. Then I put the receipts away. By Irish standards, €3,000 over 6 months in a serious relationship wasn't alarming. Mariad's mother had lived with us for 2 years after her hip operation. That had cost something too. People help each other's families. That's what you do. That's what I told myself. And most of me believed it. But there was a small part. The part that had spent 3 decades listening for sounds that weren't right. That had noticed something. I'd met Raffi 3 times now, and every time, money had been somewhere in the conversation. I filed that away without examining it, to the way you file away a sound you can't quite place. Just background. Probably nothing. On a Thursday in mid-September, walking back from the cafe, Glenda said, "You know, renting is dead money, Brendan." She said it lightly, no particular emphasis. I said nothing. She didn't push it. We walked the rest of the way home in comfortable silence. I only remembered it later. The house conversation didn't happen once. That's the thing I want you to understand. It happened in pieces over about 6 weeks, and each piece arrived at a reasonable interval, so that by the time I was looking at the full picture, I'd already half accepted the frame. It started with a video call. Glenda rang her mother most evenings, just a quick check-in, and occasionally I was there when she did. One evening in early October, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a San Miguel, while Glenda talked to Nane on her phone, and she held the screen toward me so I could say hello, which I did, and Nane said something in Cebuano, and Glenda translated, she said the back bedroom was leaking again. The roof. I said, that was a shame. Nane said something else, and Glenda said, she says the bucket is full every morning when the rain is heavy. And then we moved on. Just a passing mention. A week later, separately, Glenda mentioned that she'd been reading about expats who'd built houses here rather than renting. She said it practically, not looking at me, just talking while she was washing up a cup. She said some of the long-term expats found it worked out cheaper in the end. I said I'd seen some of those YouTube videos. She said yes. Something like that. Nothing more was said. Then Eddie appeared. He came to dinner one Tuesday. He was Glenda's cousin, about 40, in construction. A very personable man. The kind who makes you feel immediately comfortable. The kind who has a story for every situation and tells it well. He brought a bottle of Red Horse beer and talked about his work and asked me about Ireland with what seemed like genuine interest. The house proposal arrived about an hour into the evening, somewhere between the Pansett and the San Miguels. The way Eddie laid it out, it was a financial question. He said, "I hear you're renting, $62,000 a year. That's dead money, as they say." He said he could build a proper house. 2 bedrooms, good construction, decent materials, for 1.4 million pesos, about 23,000 euro. And he did the maths out loud. At my current rent, I'd spend that in under 6 years. He'd own the build. I'd have space. Glenda could be there with me. And the land. The family had land outside Bayawan. Good land, well situated, close enough to the road. I listened to all of it. Eddie was good. Genuinely good. He knew his numbers, and he didn't rush, and he didn't pressure. When he finished, he just shrugged and said, "I'm not selling anything, just thinking out loud." Glenda said nothing. She was clearing plates. I said I'd have a think about it. Now here's what I want to tell you, because I think it's the most important thing in the whole of this story. On the drive back to Dumaguete that night, I'd got a grab. I ran the numbers myself, and they were not wrong. Now 1.4 million divided by my monthly rent savings came out at just under 6 years. I was 61. I might be here another 20 years. By pure arithmetic, a house made sense. And there was something else. I'd started picturing it. I'm not proud of this, but it's true. I'd started picturing a life in Bayawan in a house that was mine. A garden, maybe. Somewhere to put tools. Glenda cooking in a kitchen that wasn't rented. The mother next door. Mang Benny with his morning routines. A life with corners and walls and roots, rather than a furnished apartment I could be asked to leave with 60 days' notice. I think that was the most dangerous moment of the whole 14 months. Not any particular request. Not even the money that had already gone. It was that picture. The life I almost built in my head before I'd built anything with my hands. I didn't sleep well that night, and the reason I didn't sleep well was something I couldn't quite name yet. Not fear, exactly. But not suspicion, exactly. More like the feeling you get underground when a timber gives a sound it shouldn't. Not a crack, not an emergency, just a groan that isn't part of the normal vocabulary of the space. You don't panic. You go still, and you listen. I went still. The thing that was groaning, when I finally gave it my attention at about 3 in the morning, was a fact I had read in my early research and filed away without acting on. Foreigners cannot own land in the Philippines. This is not a technicality or a gray area. It is the law. Whatever I built on that land, whatever money I put into foundations and walls and a roof, would belong, legally, to whoever owned the land, which would be Glenda's family. My name would be on nothing. Yet I lay there and ran through the scenarios the way I would run through a fault in a system, methodically, one branch at a time. If Glenda and I stayed together for 20 years, this might never matter. If we parted, I would have no legal claim to a single brick. If the family disputed it, which families do, I would have no recourse. If something happened to Glenda and the family inheritance was contested, I'd read about this on expat forums. It happened more than people admitted. I would be standing in a lane outside Bayawan with a bag and nothing else. It wasn't that I thought they were planning this. I want to be clear about that. I didn't lie there thinking, this is a trap. What I thought was, this is a structure with no safety feature. In 38 years of maintenance work, I never signed off on a structure with no safety feature. I told Glenda the next morning that I needed more time to think about the house. She looked at me and nodded, and said, of course. There was no tension, no disappointment that I could read. Just, of course. We had breakfast. She went to work. But something had shifted, and both of us could feel it, even if neither of us named it. That afternoon I bought a small notebook at a national bookstore in the SM City Mall. Blue cover, lined pages. I took it home and I started writing things down. The notebook was an A5 thing, the kind students use. I'd bought it on impulse, and I wasn't entirely sure what I intended to do with it. But I'd spent my entire working life keeping maintenance logs, fault reports, repair records, anomaly notes, and something about the house situation had activated that same instinct. You don't understand a system until you can see it on paper. I started with the money. Every amount I could remember, with the date and the reason, the motorbike, Rena's fees, the Balikbayan contributions, the Bayawan visit gifts, Rafi's tricycle capital, Maricel's hospital deposit, the roof discussions, the smaller things, a bag of shopping here, a taxi fare there, a contribution to a cousin's daughter's school uniform that I'd almost forgotten. I went back through my phone for the GCash transfer records and filled in the gaps. Then I started noting the family members, not as a ledger of suspicion, more as a map. Who had I met? When? What had the conversation been about? I realized, writing it out, that I'd been introduced to 11 distinct family members over 6 months, and that 9 of those introductions had been followed within a fortnight by a financial request connected to that person. I sat with that for a long time. It was still not conclusive, I told myself. Families have needs. Needs don't follow a schedule that's considerate to outside observers. The timing could be coincidence. Probably was. But I kept the notebook. I brought it to Xi'an about 2 weeks after the house dinner. I waited until the cafe was quiet. Mid-afternoon on a Wednesday, Derek not yet arrived, just the two of us with coffee and the ceiling fans turning. I put the notebook on the table and said, I want your honest opinion of this. Xi'an read it without expression. He turned the pages slowly, the way a man reads something he's seen before in a different form. He didn't ask questions or make sounds. When he finished, he closed it and pushed it back across the table and picked up his coffee. He said, the house on the family land. That's the one you don't do. I said I'd already figured that part out. He said, good, because I've known 3 lads who did it, and all 3 of them are back home now. One of them is living in his sister's spare room in Limerick. The house is still standing in Negros. Family's in it. He wasn't saying it to frighten me. He said it the way you tell someone the road is flooded, factually, because they need to know before they drive. He went on to explain what I'd already found at 3 in the morning. Foreigners cannot own land in the Philippines, full stop, and a house built on land owned by someone else is, legally speaking, a gift to the landowner the moment it's constructed. He said a condo was different. Foreigners could own a condo unit, but land was land and the law was clear, and the courts, in his experience, I interpreted it clearly. He said the lawyer I should speak to was a man named Attorney Reyes, who had an office near the city hall and whose English was perfect and whose fees were reasonable. I paid Attorney Reyes 5,000 pesos, about €80, for an hour of his time the following Monday. He confirmed everything Xi'an had said. He also added something that I hadn't considered, that in the event of a dispute between a foreign national and a Filipino family over property built on family land, the courts almost universally found for the family. He said this without apparent judgment. Just, "This is how it is." He handed me a one-page summary of the relevant statute. I folded it and put it in the notebook. That was the legal question resolved. Clean, at least. The harder question took longer. I want to tell you about the dengue, and because I think it matters. About 2 months before the house dinner in September, I'd come down with dengue fever. If you've had it, you know. It's not a mild thing. I was flat for 4 days, fever hitting 40 degrees, joints aching in a way I can only describe as being disassembled. Glenda came over the first evening I texted her, and she stayed for 3 days. She managed my medications with the same professional calm she used at the clinic. She knew the dosages, the timing, when to be worried and when not to be. She cooked arroz caldo, rice porridge, in small batches, and made sure I ate it. She slept on the sofa, without being asked. At one point, on the second night when the fever was highest, I said something incoherent. I don't remember what. And she said quietly, "I'm here, Brendan. Just sleep." I think about that. And I think about it quite a lot. I also think about the football arguments. She supported a Cebu club in the Philippine Football League. I couldn't tell you which one now. And she had strong opinions about it that she was perfectly willing to defend loudly. I supported Mayo GAA, which she found baffling, and I spent several evenings attempting to explain the structure of the GAA and why a county that hadn't won an All-Ireland since 1951 retained its supporters' loyalty through what could only be described as a particularly Irish form of hope. She found this hilarious. She said, "So you keep supporting them even though they always lose?" I said, "That's the whole point." She laughed and shook her head and said, "Irish people are very strange." That was real. I'm certain of that. Wherever the line was between what she felt and what she calculated, the laughter on those evenings was on the genuine side of it. But here is what I also know. She was the eldest daughter of a family of 6 in rural Negros Oriental, and her father was getting older, and the roof leaked, and Rena needed to finish her degree, and Maricel had a baby coming, and Raffi had ambitions that needed capital. She had been carrying the weight of that family's future since she was old enough to understand what the weight was. That is not manipulation. That is a life. In the Philippines, the eldest daughter carries. That's simply how it is, and I'd have needed to understand that from the very beginning. And I didn't understand it nearly well enough. I couldn't tell you, even now, where the woman ended and the arrangement began. And I think that's the point. I don't think she could have told you either. I think for her, those two things had grown together over so many years that separating them would have required a surgery neither of us was equipped to perform. I closed the notebook. I didn't need to keep adding to it. I knew what I was going to do about the house. I'd known since 3 in the morning 3 weeks earlier. I just needed to be ready to say it. I told her on a Tuesday morning. She'd come over for breakfast. She did that occasionally. The clinic didn't start until 9, and we'd eaten in the way we usually did, without a lot of conversation. Just the sounds of the street outside, and the ceiling fan, and 2 people who'd grown comfortable enough together not to fill every silence. When we'd finished, I said, "I've thought about the house, and I don't think I can commit to it financially. Not at this point." She looked at me for a moment. I watched her face do something small and private that I couldn't read. Then she nodded and said, "I understand." That was it. No scene, no challenge. Just, "I understand." She finished her coffee, rinsed the cup at the sink the way she always did, said she'd be in touch, and left. I stood in the kitchen for a while after she'd gone. The fan turned. A jeepney rattled past outside. The woman down the lane was playing something slow and devout on a small speaker, something that might have been a novena. I thought, well, that's that, so. I was not sure exactly what I'd ended. That's the honest answer. I still don't know. The relationship, if that's what it was, didn't end with a confrontation. It receded, like a tide going out, gradual, without drama. And you only notice the waterline has changed when you look up, and the rock that was covered is exposed again. The Thursday cafe visits stopped. Sunday Mass, she was absent the first week, then the second. Her texts became less frequent, and then infrequent, and then occasional, and then stopped. About 3 weeks after the Tuesday breakfast, Sion mentioned, without preamble, without editorializing, just the way he mentioned most things, that Glenda had been seen at the cafe with a man named Franz. Dutch, recently arrived. Retired, early 60s. Something in financial services, apparently. Sion said it the way you'd say, "The road works on the main street are finished. Information only." I said, "Right, so." There was a sting to it. I'd be lying if I said there wasn't. It was the kind of sting you feel when something confirms what you already suspected, but were keeping slightly to one side of your direct vision. It clarified things. It also, and I don't enjoy saying this, relieved me of a certain ambiguity I'd been carrying. She'd moved on with the efficiency of someone who had a plan that continued regardless of which particular variable occupied position A. Franz would make his own mistakes, or he wouldn't. That wasn't my business. I want to go through the numbers because I think people watching this deserve the actual figures, not a vague sense of loss. The family contributions, Rafi's tricycle, Maricel's hospital, the motorbike, Rena's fees, the smaller items, came to approximately 180,000 pesos. About 3,000 euro. The upgraded apartment. I compared to what I'd originally been paying, cost me an extra 10,000 pesos a month for 10 months. That's 100,000 pesos, roughly 1,600 euro in additional rent. Gifts, pasalubong, the Bayawan visit supplies, the lawyer's consultation, various incidentals I've tracked in the notebook, another 80,000 pesos or so, about 1,300 euro. When I add it honestly, the total is somewhere around 460,000 pesos, just under 7,600 euro. My savings stand at approximately 54,000 euro. They were 62,000 when I arrived. The pension comes in every month. I have not lost the house in Leitrim. I have not borrowed anything from anyone. I moved back to a smaller apartment in February. 13,500 pesos a month. 1 street from the boulevard, 5 minutes from the cafe. I kept the balcony. Gave up the second room I never used anyway. Now let me tell you where I actually am, not just financially. I still walk the boulevard every morning before the heat comes up. The Bebinka woman is still on her corner, and she still nods at me. I still have coffee with Sion most afternoons, and Derek still holds court at his table, and Werner is still very pleased with his own sense of humor. I rang Oife last Sunday, and she asked how things were, and I said, "Quieter." She said that sounded all right. It did. It was. I started helping at an English literacy program 2 mornings a week. Basic reading, adults mostly, run by a local NGO in a room behind a church off the main road. They don't pay anything, and I wouldn't take it if they did. I go because it gives me somewhere to be on a Tuesday morning. That's the whole of it. Turns out that's enough. So, if you're watching this from somewhere cold, somewhere where your pension covers the heating oil and not much else, and you've been watching the same YouTube videos I watched at 11 o'clock at night, here is what I want to say to you. The budget works. 1,000 euro a month in the Philippines is livable. The food is cheap and good, and the weather is warm and the people are genuinely kind. None of that is a lie. But the budget assumes a stable baseline, and that baseline disappears the moment you're invested in someone and their family has needs, which families always do. Factor that in before you build the spreadsheet. The property law is absolute. Foreigners cannot own land. Whatever is built on land you don't own either. Get legal advice before you fall in love with a building plot. It costs 5,000 pesos and an hour of your time, and it might save you your retirement. And the last thing, which is the hardest to say, and probably the most important, the retirement content online shows you the price of everything and the cost of nothing. It shows you what a month costs in Dumaguete. It does not show you the bill you run up when you arrive carrying something unfinished. And the country, being warm and full of need, gives you somewhere to put it. I mistook provision for purpose. For a while, I nearly mistook companionship for rescue. Both of those things cost me something that doesn't appear on any receipt. €1,000 a month works fine. As long as you're not asking it to do the work that 1,000 therapists couldn't. That's Brendan's story, and we're grateful to him for telling it. On here at Inside the Philippines, we get a lot of messages after episodes like this one, and most of them fall into two camps. There are the people who say, I knew it, they're all the same, avoid the whole country. And there are people who say, this sounds just like my situation. What should I do? To both groups, I want to say something carefully. Glenda was not a cartoon villain. Brendan is clear about that, and so are we. She was a capable woman from a struggling family in a country where the eldest daughter carries what she carries, and a retired foreigner with savings came into her orbit. What happened between them was genuinely complicated. The obligations she was navigating were real. The affection, or whatever it was, may have been real too. The two things can coexist. In the Philippines, they often do. But here is the practical truth this story carries. The cost of living figures are accurate. The family obligation figures are not in the brochure. And the property law is non-negotiable. If you are serious about retiring here, know those three things before you book the flight. Read the statute. Consult the lawyer. Have the conversation with yourself about what you're actually running toward versus what you're running from. Brendan is still there, by the way. Still on the boulevard. Still winning occasional arguments about Mayo football with anyone willing to engage. He says he's all right. We believe him. If this story gave you something to think about, we'd love to hear from you in the comments. If you know someone considering this path, share it with them. It might be the most useful thing they watch before they go. Subscribe if you haven't, and we'll see you on the next one. This is Inside the Philippines. Take care of yourselves,